Seglum in favilla, testet David
Hello, and welcome to A Life with Culture. I'm St. John Flynn. Houston-based soprano, composer, director, and performance artist Misha Penton describes her work Requiem as a voice and video reflection upon the challenges, sorrows, and expectations of 2020. The six-movement piece, a dream world of transformations, as she calls it, is inspired by Mozart's famous Requiem. Misha Penton joins me now. Misha Penton, thank you very much for joining me. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat.
I want to talk to begin with about your Requiem, which is a project that you've been working on during the pandemic. Tell me about what this project is.
Well, I had been doing micro operas and sort of video and voice sketches since maybe about December, January timeframe. And the Requiem is an extension of that. I had always wanted to compose something like a Requiem or a Tenebrae or some big sort of epic piece. And I didn't really have an entree to that. And these micro works provided that. And so I began to work on little fragments of the Latin text of the Requiem Mass. And I used a contemporary edition of a Mozart Requiem vocal score as a kind of a little bit of a guide with the text, and also as I went along using my own vocal layering in recording, I decided to begin to incorporate tiny little pieces of the vocal parts from Mozart's Requiem.
Right.
So that's kind of how it developed. At first it was an experiment. And anybody who knows me or knows my work knows that it usually turns into some kind of epic spectacle extravaganza. Not quite a spectacle in this case, but so it grew, the project grew, and it was over the course of the spring and the summer. So it was a relatively long period of time. It's 6 movements, and each movement is between like 10 or 15 seconds to a minute, and the whole piece is about 4 minutes long. And then I did a bunch of filming and put that together. So that's kind of the genesis of the project.
How did you go about creating the vocal line, the melody, if you like?
Mm-hmm. Initially, I was using sort of experimental improvisational processes in composition, because that's kind of where my passion is a bit in voice work, with a grounding in classical vocal technique. But then for this project, I actually began to compose, as in notate, fragments of what I think of in this piece as the lead vocal, the main vocal line. And I recorded those, and I had been doing over time different projects where I did multi-layered voice in recorded projects, whether it was collaborative or solo. So it was a continuation of that. And I recorded the main voice first, and then the secondary voice layers. I think the whole thing has about 7 voice tracks altogether. Were in some ways improvisational, semi-improvisational, sometimes composed. So it's kind of a hybrid process. because that's another one of my interests too, is the this liminal space between speech and singing, which kind of has a history in early 20th century expressive voice practices. So there's a little bit of that in this. So that was the process, and I kind of just went through it movement by movement, because I really wasn't sure how long it was going to be, or I kind of let the process lead me.
One of the things that marks this and another of your projects, the micro operas, is a strong sense of fragmentation. That what you create is fragmentary. Why does that appeal to you?
I think that has to do with kind of an approach to creative work that honors kind of flotsam and jetsam a little bit. So I've done projects where I've had existing fragments of voice pieces, or musical fragments, or image fragments, or video fragments, and I kind of put that together. So there's a lot of chance and indeterminacy, which I kind of like, working with those unexpected moments in the creative process. And I think because these are so brief, the micro operas and the Requiem is so brief, it kind of lends itself to, even though it's fragmentary, it's a macro world. I also do macro photography, so I love these little gems of tiny, a tiny little, a little leaf, or a little raindrop on a leaf. So part of it is kind of zooming in on a fragment, and then the fragment actually becomes something that's kind of whole.
Part becomes the whole.
Yeah, it's really, I don't know, it's kind of just an extension of the way I think I work, and these particular pieces that are tiny do lend themselves to that fragmentary, looking at fragments as a whole, or looking at the tiny piece as something that's larger.
As you say, you have a strong classical background, classical singing. You used to sing in the Houston Grand Opera Chorus, and but you often now refer to what you do as post-opera. What do you mean by that?
I kind of stole that word from the musicologist Yelena Novak, who talks about, she sees post-opera as a reinvention of opera, new pieces that incorporate media. A lot of her work is focused on proscenium stage works, some dedicated media pieces. So I'm kind of borrowing that term to say that this is what opera could be, or is now, or can be, or is a facet of what opera is in the 21st century. I do really favor classical vocal technique. So that's sort of the thread that really ties me to the tradition, even though I feel like I'm kind of involved, as a lot of us are now, especially in reshaping what opera is or can be. And I think the constraints of what we're dealing with now in terms of media and online work, I hope it can be an opportunity to some extent. It's and, not or. It's right. It's not about getting rid of, a really rich and multi-layered tradition, but it's about expanding that and expanding the possibilities for it. So that's kind of how I come to post opera. I'm no longer, by the way, with the Houston Grand Opera Chorus, but I did sing with them for a number of years, which was a great learning experience that I'm grateful for.
You've also been putting out, during the pandemic, these micro operas, as you titled them. What are these?
So those began as really an ambitious durational art project that I was going to do a micro opera every week for a year. Of course, that didn't quite transpire. Right now, I've got 11 parts to the micro operas. And the way that those began was I already had a daily voice and music practice. And I wanted to really up my game in terms of video. And I wanted to have a daily video work that I committed myself to. Mm-hmm. So part of that was simply when I was out and about I walk and run a lot around my neighborhood and in Houston. And I just began taking little video snippets, again, a fragment, maybe it was a minute or 30 seconds of my surroundings. And at that time, it was the spring. And so there was all these wildflowers along the bayou. And where I live, the bayou's concretized and you can see the skyline of the city often. And so it's this, juxtaposition of the wild flowers and nature and this intensity that I feel Houston is an intense metropolis.
Right.
So, I began to collect these video fragments. And again, in a process of sort of chance, I would put them together with recorded voice works that were also fragmentary, usually multi-layered. And they became kind of these micro worlds, these little glimpses of just a moment in time. Mm-hmm. And I released them online with my hashtag Micro Opera Monday. So that, and it kind of snowballed. It's kind of related to the miniatures of classical music or postcard pieces, which a lot of musicians are doing now. Mm-hmm. So it's really created its own body of work, which is really cool. And it's part of, part of the way I think of the creative process is one grain of sand into the bucket at a time. It's a practice, mm-hmm. as in a verb. And you get product along the way, but the practice really births the things that you share, the products that you share.
And in many respects, the thing about the micro operas is that in one sense, they're standalone pieces, but in another sense, each one adds a little bit more to what came before. So they add to the whole, don't they?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that it's often the case with the work that I do that I understand it better when I reflect on it or look back on what I've done. And then I go, oh, that's what it was about a little bit, because I don't really work with messaging or narrative content. Mm-hmm. So the creative process itself kind of, steers the trajectory of the work. And also I learn from it when I do look back on it. And I can see that both technically and artistically, the pieces did or have been growing upon each other.
In this post-opera world, what is the status of storytelling, of narrative?
Post-opera is often closely related to ideas from theater, the post-dramatic, which is a breakdown of narrative, or a reinvention of what narrative can be. So you don't really have, in a traditional sense, a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I'm kind of on board with that. And most of my work has always been like that, where there's a mood or an aesthetic, and there often is a theme and maybe a story that has inspired the work, but I'm not telling it in a traditional linear narrative way.
Right.
So that's kind of, that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of narrative, or lack thereof, I should say, maybe.
You're currently working on your PhD, your doctorate, at Bath Spa University in the UK.
Yeah.
And that is in the area of music?
Yes, yes. I'm very close to submitting, and the PhD is centered around voice, vocality in composition, composing with and through the voice, within a post-opera context, really. So I have the way the programs work in the UK in this instance is it's practice-based. So I have a portfolio of works and a written thesis that accompanies the work. So it's very much focused in voice and composition, and in the way that I'm particularly working with composing with the voice.
Is it difficult? Do you find it difficult to write about what it is that you do?
I do find it very difficult, and I had a number of excursions in looking for artistic theory or philosophical theory, which was simpatico to my process, because what I'm doing is very intuitive. So in a doctoral program, I can't really just say, oh, I'm being intuitive. I have to look at intuitive processes in the arts and the humanities, and kind of find resonances with, for instance, ideas of embodiment and what is thought of as embodied vocality, where you are really connected physically to your voice and to your experience in the world. So there have been a number of interesting things that I've found along the way, but yeah, it's been challenging to sort of be able to write about an intuitive process, and one of my ways of dealing with that challenge has been, in parts of my thesis, it's quite poetic. So I've woven in experimental writing and poetics into the written thesis, which mirrors my creative work and my process.
One of the things that I know is important to you is the visual element in your work.
Yeah.
How can the visual and the vocal exist separately for you? Or are they, in some respects, one and the same?
I've, over time, especially with the influence of the internet and media, they've really have become quite joined. I always feel a little bit tentative or hesitant to release only audio, as if somehow there has to be some visual element to it. And it's a good question for me to interrogate, because, you know, for so long, music was released only as audio before we had the kind of technology that we have.
Right.
I do have without dating myself too much, I do have a great love of early MTV and music videos. And that was a big influence on me. And so I think that that's a little bit of the seed of my desire to unify images with sound.
What do you think finishing the PhD what impact will that have on you as an artist?
It has been a really interesting and challenging and fruitful project, the PhD project. And I think that it has allowed me to actually really find my voice as a singer and as a composer, and find a real foundation and confidence in that artistic voice. So that's had a very big impact on my work. So it's been difficult, but it's been in a good way and challenging. So I think that's really the main thing, is really finding a focus and finding a unique artistic voice, or what I feel is authentic. Maybe unique's not the right word, but feels very authentic to my experience as a person and as an artist.
What does it mean for your future?
Well, I went into this, the doctoral work with the mindset that it would be artistically and creatively fulfilling as with its own intrinsic value. Mm-hmm. So I think that was really important to clarify that for myself, because things like full-time teaching in university settings is very unpredictable, and now it's really unpredictable. So I didn't really have really professional designs in terms of what traditionally a PhD would do. Mm-hmm. I have had the opportunity to do some publishing, which I do like a lot. I like writing a lot. So I'm not really sure, but it has been really valuable as an artist, for sure.
Well, look, Misha, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. The whole idea of the micro opera and the micro requiem is absolutely fascinating. Best wishes as you complete the PhD. Please, I was going to say, don't move to England.
No, don't worry.
I hope that you'll stay here and stay safe in these times, and stay creative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you to you for joining us here again on A Life with Culture. I'm St. John Flynn. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you next time.